The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
As we always do, despite all of the breaking national and international news of a historic nature, like the Trump indictment, for example, we return this week to Pennsylvania. As some of you know, our state's fiscal year ends June 30th, which means our state can spend no money starting July 1st without a new budget. So we brought in a person who bears that responsibility for the House Republicans, and that is Pennsylvania Representative Seth Grove, a member of the House Leadership Caucus, and he is also the Appropriations Chairman in the House of Representatives. Seth's path to public service began when he enlisted in the United States Navy and was selected for its nuclear engineering program and submarine school. Seth's father served in the Navy during the Vietnam War, so military service ran in his family. Regrettably, he was discharged for medical reasons due to a congenital heart defect, which was undetected since childhood. After his naval service, Seth went on to public administration major at York College. After college, he became a legislative assistant to United States Congressman Todd Platts, and then served in a similar role for Pennsylvania Senator Sam Saylor, and ultimately became Chief of Staff for Pennsylvania Representative Keith Gillespie. Seth was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2008 and has been re-elected 7 times. He has served on 13 of the House's standing committees. Due to his legislative accomplishments, he has been asked to speak at national conferences on state fiscal policy. Seth resides in Dover with his wife, Dr. Casey Grove, and their 3 children. And today, we are going to be talking to him about some red herrings in Governor Josh Shapiro's budget.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Seth, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, and it really is a privilege for me, as well as I'm sure many of our viewers, to have someone directly related in a leadership position, none more powerful than House Appropriations Chairman, which you were chairman in the majority, and now you're the minority chairman. Obviously, the Democrats have a one-vote plurality, if you want to call it that. But nonetheless, a House Appropriations Chairman, which means you are dealing directly with the governor's staff, your colleagues in the Democratic side of the aisle, as well as the Senate, because when you get done, it goes to the Senate, of course. But they're working on their end of it anyway already as we speak. So to get someone who's inside the room with a pencil, with an eraser on it, is always good to know and to have on our show. So I asked you off air to confirm a guest on this show a number of times. It's been probably a couple years, but Pat Brown. Senator Pat Brown was the Senate Appropriations Chairman in the majority. He is now under Josh Shapiro's administration, a Democratic administration, he is the acting, is it Revenue Secretary?
Yeah, he's the acting Revenue Secretary, and we finished up budget hearings a few weeks ago. So it's kind of weird to see. Pat's also a former House member. So when he came over the House, we jokingly were like Representative Pat Brown instead of former Senator Pat Brown. It's just a fun internal chamber, like, gotcha kind of. It was weird to see him like on the other side of the table having to answer the tough questions versus deal them out. He did a very good job. It was good to see him. But it was weird looking at him on the other side of the table.
I have been very complimentary of our governor, Josh Shapiro. In part, I'll admit, because I was somewhat used to 8 years of dysfunction, authoritarianism, dictatorial power grabs, an elitist ivory tower flat-out mentality that Governor Tom Wolf had. I was one of his biggest critics, really, from the beginning of his tenure. The only governor in history to not sign a budget in his first full term in office. So So the one concept was that it was refreshing to have a governor that appeared willing to talk to Republican majorities and colleagues about governing, which obviously a governor can do nothing without. You're the appropriator. So that was encouraging. Yeah. I was encouraged by articles, editorials I read, one in, I think it was the Philadelphia Inquirer, by a guy named Will Bunch, who wrote an article a month into his, I believe a month or so into his administration, and he made a comment. The quote was, "There is blood on the sidewalks of Pennsylvania from progressive Democrats biting their lip over our new governor." And he was one of them. So, and that is the best indicator to me that what I was seeing, that he has moved to the middle. So get your take on, before we get into specifics of the budget, on that view.
Yeah, you have a governor that's has a couple of Republicans in his cabinet. Al Schmidt's, I believe, going to get nominated, approved by the Senate for Department of State. You have Pat Brown, former Republican senator, going to get confirmed as Revenue Secretary. Josh is kind of Legislative Affairs Secretary. The person that's in charge is a former House Republican. So he is building those. He's a former legislator. He gets governing. Picking a fight all the time with the General Assembly doesn't lead to moving and getting big things done. So I think he's smart enough to understand that it's a give and take.
Right.
Watch his budget address. And by the way, it was a very long budget address. Probably one of the longest I've had to sit through, longer than the Wolf rants and lectures that we've been through. But it was very positive. Like, he wants to compete. He wants to grow Pennsylvania's economy. There are Republican stuff. For the first time, we've had a Democratic governor, or really high-end elected official, come in and say, "I want to fund the police." That's a big deal. That is a very big deal, and completely minimalizes that leftist woke policy of defund the police attitude. So it was very unique. Now there's some stuff he's obviously very pro-choice, big union guy. So there's things he laid out. Don't even bother with these. But there's other areas we can work together on. He was the Attorney General. So there's that crime justice stuff we can work on together. So it is a lot more refreshing than having the former governor, who, by the way, lived 5 miles away from me. And really never wanted to have a conversation about anything. So, that level of frustration is now gone. And two, he knows the legislature. He's been a member. He was in the majority. He was in the minority. Okay. He gets it. So I think we'll be better off over the long haul with him as the governor instead of Governor Wolf. I'd prefer a Republican, but if I'm going to take a Democrat, I'd rather have a Josh Shapiro who's left of center, a little left of center, and trying to govern in that middle area, rather than the extremist woke progressive Tom Wolf or someone else.
Well, I was very encouraged relative to our state's energy policy. We were on a one-way road into the abyss, into Armageddon with Wolf, putting us into Reggie. But again, back to Josh Shapiro, he's been open-minded about that, and he's talked and understands the billions of impact to our economy, Pennsylvania's economy, the countless jobs, thousands and even hundreds of thousands of jobs related to that industry, that he's going to come in and obviously work with that. So I'm also very encouraged about some of the stuff that, you've talked about. Talk to some people about when they have Democratic governors or Democratic mayors, like in New York City, like Alvin Bragg in the district attorney's office, like Chesa Bonin out in, they recalled him in San Francisco. They've destroyed cities with their progressive. Right here in Pennsylvania, Larry Krasner, I think you guys filed articles of impeachment. So it is refreshing to hear that. So having said that,
let me talk about this Reggie thing real quick.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, and I know the governor, while he was Governor Shapiro, while running for office, said he wasn't interested in it. He was very leery of it. It's in his budget. He has proposed to continue Reggie, and it's a tax increase of $633 million. It was buried in there, was mentioned twice, and all the revenues going into the Clean Air Fund, which is a special fund, which you're going to have to go back pages of a 900-page budget to see where the money's at. Fastest way to do is to pull up PDF and do like a find to actually find it. It's buried in there.
Wow.
During budget hearings, we pressed his DEP secretary to ask him to rescind the regulation, because as soon as you rescind it, it's gone.
Right.
There's no more lawsuit. It's gone. It's done. We don't have to do anything. His DEP secretary refused to rescind it. So we're very curious to see if he's breaking a campaign promise. If he wants it, is this a negotiation? Regardless, if he in fact didn't want it and wants to make sure our shale industry and people's electricity prices don't shoot up, that $633 million tax increase is going to show up on your electric bill.
No question.
That is how they're going to do it, right? So like, we were very frustrated that it was A, in there, and two, they refused just to rescind the reg. Right. Now their argument is it's in court, it's being held up, but it's to us, just rescind it and we can all move on. If you don't want it, you don't support it, rescind it. Right. The other aspect, something else, he ran on Lifeline Scholarships, which was a voucher program. It was on his campaign website. He talked about it, fully support. We need choice. Right. It's scrubbed from his campaign website, and there's no mention of school choice at all in his budget. When we pressed his education secretary, this is what he said, like literally screenshot of his campaign website. This is what he said. Where's it at? Well, we want to have conversations with the General Assembly. Like and literally he said, we support the Lifeline Scholarship as proposed by the Pennsylvania General Assembly or other states. Now it's, well, we really didn't like that bill now that we're in office. So we're very worried about these campaign promises, the expectation of citizens saying, oh, well, now, I'm going to vote for him because he is for school choice. That may not be the case. So we're going to continue to push for choice. But I think it's a little dishonest to be that hard and that much of a campaign statement. And then as soon as first budget, we're just going to ignore it and just say, well, we have to have a conversation.
Right.
Support it, just admit, like, I don't support school choice. I'm walking away from it. Yeah.
Right. But I needed to get elected.
Right.
Well,
I'm going to co-op a Republican position to get Republican votes. Yeah. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to ignore it afterwards. It's not fair.
Thank you for the education and the enlightenment. Mm-hmm. See, that's stuff even I'm pretty learned and follow it. I didn't know, and that's what I said, how your value mm-hmm. to us as a guest, and to our Northeast and Central Pennsylvania viewers that get to hear what's really going inside behind those closed doors. So, the bloom, I'll say, is off the rose. I was very encouraged, and as you heard me speak, in glowing terms so far, as a Republican conservative, about I can live with a Democratic governor that's responsible, and giving him the benefit of the doubt. Apparently, I should reserve judgment on some of this stuff, so thank you for that. Getting back to the budget process, is it possible that he's put things in disavowing his own campaign pledges on Reggie and the other stuff, school choice, with the hope of to actually follow through on that, get a couple of things you guys may have said, no interest. Well, now all of a sudden it becomes horse trading again. So Pennsylvania's good hands with you doing the horse trading. I'm hoping that's what it is.
Yeah, so it very well could be. He could be saying, well, they're going to ask for it anyway. I'm not going to put it in there. I'm going to make him, quote, buy it for whatever else I want. Higher spend number over here, or a line item, or some other policy he may want. Right. That very well could be the case. But for things you've been so animate about, right? It was clear. Like you started off, like it was clear where he was at on school choice and on Reggie. Right. He was a yes on school choice and a no on Reggie. And then find out it's buried secretly in the budget, tucked away. I think it lacks transparency and really backs away from that discussion. But it is going to be a horse trade. It's going to be back and forth. And listen, there's line items, governor's veto, line item veto. Like, okay, we know this is something you guys like, so I'm going to line item veto it and ask you to bring it back.
Right.
So it's a dance, right? You're just doing a dance. You're having the discussions. And then you go back and we have priorities. The Senate has priorities. Democratic caucuses have priorities. The governor has priorities, and you put it together, and you concoct a giant piece of meat, right? The sausage. It's grinded up and spits out, and that's what you're left with. Right. And it's tough because from a legislative perspective, you have a vote and you're voting on something that is a massive compromise, right? You may have some input to say, hey, people at the negotiation table, this is what I would like to see in the budget. And you got to filter that through 203 House members, 50 senators, and a governor, plus all the secretaries, all the individuals out there advocating for different stuff in the budget. And you do the best job you can with that playing field, which can be tough.
Seth, we're going to take a quick break. I have a 3.5-minute view that will run during the show. So we'll be right back after this message. My most recent view warned of the gathering storm clouds across the landscape of academia as backlash against the closed-minded, ignorant, radicalized progressive left on campus, in lecture halls, and the faculty lounge. Unwittingly, they have unleashed the finest minds on the right of heterodox thinkers. Thankfully, some in the intellectual left are smart enough to see the danger in forces lining up against them. One is columnist Pamela Paul of the New York Times. She talks of her sophomore year at Brown University. She recalls the evening that United States Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia came to speak at campus. Back then, a progressive mob of students organized to attend Scalia's talk, awaiting the question and answer session that would follow. I will now quote from Paul's column. Begin quote. "We were right about everything. We knew our enemy, Scalia, and we hated him. Once Scalia finished and we the righteous had a chance to speak truth to the evil one, we would rip apart his so-called originalism, hypocrisies, his imperiousness. We were chomping at the bit to have our say. And then he wiped the floor with us. In answer to our indignant questions, he calmly rebutted. We fulminated, and he reasoned. And when we seethed, he lobbed back with charm. Within the hermetic bubble of my liberal upbringing and education, it had never occurred to me that even when finally presented with the truth, someone from the other side could prevail. I'd been certain we would humiliate him. Instead, I left humbled. Is it worth letting someone speak if some students consider that person's views objectionable, even abhorrent? But another question to ask is, what gets lost if we don't let that person speak? It isn't enough to challenge someone unless you are willing to be challenged back. I realized most people don't divide neatly into heroes and villains. What happens if you assume your political opponent isn't evil? If you even know that he is not? Because if you assume your opponent is immoral, you don't have to listen to him. But if you assume your political opponent is operating in good faith, you will be inclined to hear him out. We know universities can do a better job of preventing one form of speech from inhibiting another. The harder task, but perhaps the important lesson, will be teaching students not to want to do so. They shouldn't avoid opportunities to hear other perspectives, but should actively seek them out and reckon with the humbling fact that what they already know or think they know may not be all there is to know. Isn't that, after all, precisely what learning is about? End quote. All right, Seth, we're back. I have to admit, following, I guess, in this line of questioning, almost poking fun at some things like how Pat Brown, that sat in this studio, is now on the other side, ostensibly anyway. But now another thing that's interest to me, the Republicans have been getting a lot of heat, and look, some of it deserved, both in the General Assembly in Pennsylvania and God knows in Congress in Washington. Mm-hmm. In Washington, it's called the Freedom Caucus. But it's their right part where they partition out, and they were Tea Party members. They were part of that Freedom Caucus at the Washington level. But there were similar issues you had with your farther right that you have to bring into line. And the Democrats have been sitting over there laughing, rolling around at the infighting that goes on, can't get stuff done because they won't sign off on certain things. Well, now the shoe's on the other foot, apparently, and I'd like your take on two things. One is my sources tell me that there are problems with their far left progressive, I call them radical progressives, that they want things in the budget that they know really it's going to be tough to get Republican Senate support for. So they bring the whole process kind of to a halt. Talk about that. And then secondly, talk about, for apparently, they're just getting around to giving a budget. They waited till a special election they knew it was a Democratic seat. So why they waited. So the two things. So it's a two-part. Take it from there. Let's start with the civil war going on among the Democrats now.
Yeah, so they're starting a new progressive caucus in the House Democratic Caucus. Their role is to push their caucus more to the left, more towards socialism and communism. What does that mean? So here's a good example. One of their members recently introduced a bill for a $21 minimum wage, right? $21, and it'll apply to criminals. So rapists, pedophiles, murderers sitting in jail, instead of getting their 20 to 30 cent pay an hour, which you're allowed to do because you're in jail, he wants to give them $21 an hour, which is going to be a huge cost increase to our corrections budget. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about.
My God, I'm shocked. Look, I have to, sorry to interrupt.
It's extreme.
Are you kidding me? Well, now they're also, in fact, they're voting them with the mail-in votes. So now they're literally trying to buy their votes from prison. Really?
Right. And that is the extremist policies that caucus will want to push, which is a hard time during budget, because I really don't believe the Democratic caucus has the votes to actually lift Governor Shapiro's budget. I think they want more money. They want more spending. It does not spend enough money. Yeah, it's $2 billion out of whack. The governor's spending $2 billion more than what we have in revenues, and he's relying on one-time rainy day reserve funds to prop it up, which eventually, right, will run out. You can't use your credit card to pay your mortgage indefinitely, right?
Right.
It doesn't work. And that's what his budget does. And it's, for them, it's not enough. Well, ask what lines, it's just not enough money. So they're going to have to come back with massive tax increases to fill these holes. Because right now, Josh's budget runs out of savings account dollars in 5 years. The more spending you do, the quicker it runs out, right? So it's going to be, I think, very difficult for them to get their caucus. And listen, it's not easy governing, right? It's easier to vote no. It is far easier to vote no. And it's tough to get people to yes, particularly on a big compromise budget that you may not know the intimate details because grant programs go out, like just how it works, right? They're going to have problems. I think they're going to have problems getting a budget done. I don't think they're going to carry it with their entire caucus. It's going to be 102 members of the House of Representatives making a vote to get a budget done. So it's going to be really interesting. Jordan Harris, the chairman, which, by the way, I like Jordan a lot personally. Great guy. He did a great job his first time kind of overseeing a committee. He did a great job on the hearings. He was very fair, allowed our members to ask tough questions. He was a big stickler on those 5 minute, the time getting things done. But when you have a committee of like 22 people, 5 minutes times 20, it takes a while, right, to get through questions. He does a phenomenal job. I look forward to working with him. We have a great relationship. I think that helps lead to a bipartisan budget getting done. But they'll want some very crazy stuff that ultimately is going to economically hurt our state.
No.
And I'm very worried about it.
Well, I think I'm thinking of a quote. I want to say William Faulkner. I think the quote was, "The past is not dead. It's not even past." So I go right back to, this sounds like the old bait and switch we learned about in law school. Here's what I mean by that. So let me go, speaking of the past. We have that horrible, obviously, economic crisis back in 2007, 2008. The bubble burst on the bundled mortgages. It was a catastrophe. All kinds of federal bailing out banks. Too big to fail was a popular term of art. States got a lot of money for a lot of things is part of that. So Democratic Governor Ed Rendell, like Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro today, plugged all kinds of this one-time money into the budget and into the economy in Pennsylvania. And then here's the tactic, though. Now you get Republican Governor Tom Corbett was elected in 2010. Now that money was gone. The federal money was only one time. It was gone. And now, of course, he had to make cuts. They put like $1 billion into education, Seth, if you remember. Well, they didn't have that money anymore, and there was no revenue source to support it. So naturally, Governor Tom Corbett has said, we don't have that money. We have to make cuts. Then they blame him for cutting education in Pennsylvania. Are we seeing almost the same circus again where you have all this one-time money, and then they're going to blame the Republicans when you have to cut things to balance the budget? We still do have to balance our budget, right, in Pennsylvania by law?
Right. You still have to balance it. You have to balance it for 1 second, one day when the revenue secretary signs the estimates and stuff like that. But you still have to bring it in line. You need to make sure you have revenues in place that meet the expenditures. It has to be in balance. So it's very frustrating as someone who I believe in good budget. I believe in good fiscal policy. If you don't have the money, you can't spend, right? If you want the money, go raise the taxes and do what you need to fund those things. But you can't play the game of we're going to spend more, use one-time revenue for recurring expenses, create this massive underfunding, and then use all the reserve funds. By the way, this is without really a recession, right? Like we're going to hit a recession. It's coming. You're watching the trucking industry. You're watching all the indicators. The Fed, another quarter percentage in interest payments. It's coming. And it's going to be
failures too? Bank failures too?
Yeah, banks are coming. I mean, listen, we had what? 2 fail. How many more? Like they're struggling. Like we got a lot of bad economic stuff coming down the pike. Could it be a blip and we're back on track? Maybe. Could be worse than the Great Recession. All I know is bad economic times are happening. We have a governor propose a budget that's out of balance and uses one-time revenue for recurring expenses. And I have a House Democratic caucus that wants to even spend more money on top of that. You can't do all that simultaneously. So we got to look at redoing it. Now, what's interesting with County Commissioner Josh Shapiro, right? Josh has worn many, many political hats. His first term as County Commissioner in Montgomery County, he implemented zero-based budgeting. He brought in the current budget secretary, who was his budget guy in Montgomery County. They closed a structural deficit that was larger than Tom Wolf's first one without raising taxes by reprioritizing spending. And that's what we need to do. Like that is when you were praising Josh, I think that is the bold leadership people want out of Harrisburg, whether you're Republican or a Democrat. Fund the important things that are going to make our state successful. Get rid of all the stuff that doesn't work, all the little add-ins and stuff. Get rid of it. Focus on not raising taxes because inflation is killing our families, just killing our families. My wife hasn't talked about grocery bills up until this year. Like I got a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old that are eating eggs like there's no tomorrow. Luckily, Princess. She has some spurts of eating, but I mean, my God, my 13-year-old is eating us out of house and home. So, I mean, that's the reality of what families are facing. Right. Add an income tax on top of that, add a sales tax on top of that, right? It's just, it's asking too much for Pennsylvanians with the current economy and that future economy that's coming. It's going to be some kind of recession, depression. There's bad economic times coming.
All right. Well said. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time you have given us today. We have blown through a half hour like it wasn't even there. And I hope you'll let me, after June the 30th, when we can talk about the sausage that actually came out on sale for the public, will you come back and tell us what's actually
hopefully by June 30th, right.
Seth, thanks so much for making time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.